Loud V10 engines. 911, Prime, Jensen, the first driver to press the DRS button.
That's a long middle name.
God, the 2000s was such a great time. I mean, 4-year-old me remembers Crashgate clear as day. I was so fuming on that day, I probably ate a Lego brick. Okay, so maybe my memory of the 2000s is pretty weak, considering I wasn't even born for some of it. And my F1 knowledge at the time didn't expand much further than being absolutely convinced that this little line on the F1 logo was called the hair. Seriously though, what the f was that part of the logo meant to be? I mean, I get the 1 is in the middle of the F and the hair, but what is it? Is it meant to be fast lines or is it literally just a hairbrush? Anyway, what I can do, thanks to the time machine that I definitely own, and the internet that lets me look up things from the past, what I can do is summarize in around 15 to 20 minutes of me yapping all about the 2000s. Whether you already know a lot about it and just want a quick refresher in a funny way, or whether you actually want to learn something, in which case you may be in the wrong place. So let's take a look at the huge changes that defined the decade and how it led to modern Formula One. And what better place to start than probably one of the most memorable aspects of the 2000s, Ferrari's total dominance of the early years.
Do you know many Ferraris?
No. They race on the European circuit. I'm in the Piston Cup. What?
Luigi follow only the Ferraris.
Between the year 2000 and 2004, Michael Schumacher and Ferrari won everything. There's no better way to put it. It's easy to look back at the stats and look at the length of the domination and just think, wow, Ferrari must have had it so easy during this era. You know, something similar to Verstappen last year in 2023, where he absolutely dominated a season. But honestly, that wasn't the case the entire time. For example, in the year 2000, there was a lot of pressure on Ferrari to perform. In 1998, Hakkinen had beat off I can't use the word beat off. Hakkinen had taken the championship over Michael Schumacher. Then in 1999, Michael Schumacher entered Skate 3 Hall of Meat mode and shattered his legs into a million pieces. So it was up to number 2 driver Eddie Irvine this time to put up the best title fight he could, although his chances were pretty much scuppered by the time he had a 50-hour-long pit stop. Thank you, Ferrari. Poor strategy since 1999.
Das Auto.
So going into 2000, Ferrari was starting to get concerned. I mean, there's only so much the managers are going to put up with when the results aren't being delivered. They'd hired on Michael Schumacher in 1996 and hadn't received the results they wanted since that time. Especially considering going into that, they built the whole team around Schumacher, so they expected him to perform. In 2000, the battle was fierce between Hakkinen and Schumacher, with the penultimate round being where Michael actually managed to take the championship finally for the Ferrari team, and that would secure his 3rd World Drivers' Championship and his first for Ferrari. Italians all over the world that day drank wine, partied, and told people they were eating food wrong because they invented it. F you Italians, I love Ferrari, but I am putting garlic mayo on my pizza. Thank you very much. 2000 also wasn't without its controversy, as during the Italian Grand Prix that year, we suffered the death of a marshal. A bit of a reminder that despite the racing being close and really fun to watch, it still wasn't of the safety standard we would expect. As heading into the second chicane at Monza, Frentzen collided with an Arrows car, his wheel came loose and it struck one of the marshals who was standing at his post, which killed him instantly. So of course, after something like this, F1 had to review its safety standards as it's just unacceptable to be happening. So let's see what happened moving into 2001. In terms of the title fight, it wasn't really that spectacular, nothing as exciting as 2000. Mika Hakkinen had a pretty poor year, finishing quite far off teammate David Coulthard, who was the closest rival Michael Schumacher had, but the McLarens couldn't really match the Ferraris this season. In 2001, the Twin Towers said bye-bye to everybody, so at the Italian Grand Prix that year, some tributes were made. A race which, incidentally, Williams would go on to win with Juan Pablo Montoya. And at that time, former IndyCar driver who'd moved to F1 with actually quite a lot of promise. So just remember that name for a little bit later on. And now let's also talk about my main man, Fernando Goat Alonso. There he is. What do you have to say, Fernando?
Ia beber slowly poisoning you with carbon monoxide.
What the fuck? Now, in 2001, this goat right here, he made his F1 debut. and he was driving for a team called Minardi, which, if you don't know, were absolutely awful. I mean, seriously, you'd be better off putting a pedal bike on the grid and trying to race the other teams. They were just atrocious. Alonso's best results were to finish 2 laps down from everybody else, as his worst results were just the car blowing up before the end of the race, which happened quite a lot. Now, every time, though, I go to talk about Fernando Alonso's rookie season, I'm reminded of this weird conspiracy that I found out. Basically, if you go to f1.com, they have a list of every single race result ever with all the teams, all the drivers that took part in the championship. Sounds simple enough. But if we go back to the race results of 2001, Alonso, his teammate, and Minardi are not listed on the drivers' or constructors' standings. I mean, if you look at the races, they're there. They're listed as finished. Minardi, Alonso, everything is normal there, but I have no idea why they aren't on the constructors or drivers standings. I mean, as far as I know, they weren't disqualified that season, but even if they were, F1 tends to still leave you listed. For example, Michael Schumacher in 1997 or McLaren in 2007, which we'll get to. It still lists them on the standings. If you do actually know the reason as to why this might be, please put it down in the comments because I'm really curious. Otherwise, I'll just send my ass over to the Joe Rogan podcast. Anyway, Alonso performed pretty well that season considering he was in a go-kart. So for 2002, he was given the Renault reserve seat in preparation to move him up to the main team. Oh yeah, in 2001, we also had another Marshall death. Oh wait, that's not really a good thing, is it? Yeah, this time a wheel flew off Jacques Villeneuve's BAR car and struck a Marshall during the Australian Grand Prix. 2 deaths in 2 years, honestly, even at that time was completely unacceptable for Formula One. F1 actually started to crack down on the wheels being able to fall off the cars in a crash. And that's why after these incidents, even to this day, you'll see whenever an F1 car crashes, there always has to be something keeping that wheel attached, as they are one of the most dangerous parts of the F1 car that can go flying off. Anyway, moving into 2002, Michael Schumacher had an absolutely incredible run of form. Honestly, this season was so strong from him, it rivals Max Verstappen's 2023 year. He became the first and currently only driver to ever finish on the podium in every single race of a season during 2002, which means he got to drink an awful lot of champagne. I bet Kimi Raikkonen was jealous. That year, though, Williams were definitely the second best car behind Ferrari, with Juan Pablo Montoya third in the standings behind the 2 Ferrari drivers, and Michael's brother Ralf Schumacher in 4th. Then McLaren followed in the constructors with the 3rd best car, although on paper they probably had the fastest, if not the 2nd fastest car over the whole season. It's just the problem McLaren had was that their car exploded every 2 seconds, especially in the hands of Mika Häkkönen's replacement, Kimi Raikkonen, who does at this point sound like the Aldi knockoff version of Mika Häkkinen. Trust me, it's just because they're both Finnish, but they are both big personalities in the sport and very different.
Kimi, what happened?
I spun.
But Raikkonen drove the absolute balls off the car, which meant that by the end of the race, the balls had actually fallen off the car and it wouldn't finish. With Raikkonen and Juan Pablo Montoya, both a little bit hotheads at the time, being so close on track, it gave us amazing radio messages, such as this one.
Fucking Raikkonen! What a fucking idiot!
Which was when F1, I think, realized they probably shouldn't broadcast the radios live. Moving into next year, though, 2003 was an incredible season I still wasn't born for. You had a 3-way title fight between the defending world champion Michael Schumacher, the man who says so little his tongue might as well have been cut off, Kimi Raikkonen, and the Colombian hothead, likely sampling his country's biggest export, Juan Pablo Montoya. This season, though, also saw the maiden win of Goat Alonso himself. Well done, Fernando. What do you remember about 2003?
I accidentally crashed the F1 car into an nursing home but don't tell anyone.
Alonso had replaced Jenson Button at Renault, as Button was fired for being too much of an eccentric playboy, which is definitely not how he would be described now. He's probably now thought of as one of the most chill drivers on the grid. Or in fact, actually no, he's Danica Patrick's worst enemy.
Long run down here into turn 1, obviously. This is fast section here.
Right, so let's talk about who the championship challengers were. Firstly, we're starting with Montoya, who, despite a good start to the season and definitely had an extremely fast car under him, managed to make so many mistakes, he put himself out of contention
Very wide. Oh! Whoa!
early on. Montoya really is just me trying to do the F1 game with no flashbacks enabled.
It's Michael Schumacher!
What the fuck was that?
So anyway, with Juan Pablo crashing out of contention, let's talk about our two other drivers. Defending champ Schumacher and drunk Finn Kimi Raikkonen. McLaren this season had a car very much close to Ferrari on pace, with it really just coming down to circuit-specific setups to decide who had the best pace. Kimi again suffered from his reliability though, although much less than in 2002, taking just 3 DNFs this year. And can I just remind you, 3 almost definitely felt like a blessing in comparison to the 2002 season, where he finished just 6 races and DNF'd in 11 of them. At that point, you might as well stop turning up to the races and just go eat ice cream on your yacht. Oh, he actually did do that after his engine blew up. Anyway, in comparison, Schumacher suffered just 1 DNF, which was during the chaos of the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix.
No! 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 Fuck!
And if you would like me to summarize that race, here is Fernando Alonso trying to drive.
One lap. So, Martin, I have to interrupt you because the Jordan team are bouncing up and down in the pit lane. Oh, we're looking at the images there of that incident of Alonso.
Genuinely, at the time, that was a really scary crash, though, for the drivers, and it was a bit of a chaotic race. The race win was actually given to Kimi Raikkonen, but we then found out that was the wrong person to give the win to, and the actual winner was Giancarlo Fisichella. Due to a timing error, the FIA had got it wrong, so Raikkonen had to give Fisichella the trophy back at the next race. It's pretty funny. Anyway, despite Schumacher's pretty poor finish in the last race of the season, he managed to finish just ahead of Raikkonen by 2 points in the standings.
I don't know, we got second place again. It's not very nice to finish second almost every time, but we were just not quick enough this year to win the title, and at least we didn't lose for bad driver.
If Kimi Raikkonen was capable of showing any emotion whatsoever, he probably would have done this face. No! But knowing him, he likely got drunk and collapsed on someone's shoes.
Well, he wasn't drinking in a bar, but he was in Monaco and he was standing in a bar. And then somebody collapsed, drunk, on his feet.
Yeah, it was me.
Yeah.
2004! What an excellent year, because yours truly, Dan No Skill, was finally alive and breathing in this world. But also, for Ferrari, this was a brilliant year, because let me tell you something about Italian engineering. I am convinced that they're probably so drunk on red wine all of the time, the Italians don't really know how to build a Formula 1 car. They probably just throw shit at the wall and hope it goes fast. Going into 2004, Ferrari began work on the F2004, which is going to be their car to compete with for the season. They were expecting maybe a couple seconds at most, or a few tenths, on their 2003 designers. It wasn't a big regulation change. So when the engineers saw the first lap of the F2004, they checked that their stopwatches were working properly because of how fast it was. The F2004 was, in fact, that fast. And to this day, it still holds some of the speed records within Formula 1, which shows just how incredible of a car it really was. At the end of 2004, Ferrari looked unstoppable. But as always, the French were about to come in and ruin everything. Well, at least if you were a Ferrari fan. Fernando Alonso, Lord Alonso himself, 2005 was the year of Alonso, and of course the French outfit of Renault. We're used to seeing Fernando as the oldest rookie on the grid, but during this point in his career, Alonso was genuinely seen as the young man in Formula 1. In fact, in 2005, he became the youngest Formula 1 world champion ever at that point. It's now Sebastian Vettel who holds that title, with Lewis Hamilton in second and Alonso in third. But at the time, Alonso was very, very young for a world champion, evidently. His main rival for 2005 was, of course, McLaren's Kimi Raikkonen, who many during this period saw as the best driver on the grid, or at least the quickest. Probably how a lot of us imagine Charles Leclerc now. Extremely quick over a race and one lap, but maybe just doesn't have the look or the car under him to be a world champion yet.
I am stupid.
Kimi did manage to overtake Alonso this season, just sadly for him whilst Alonso was going for a run.
Look, they are running.
It's Alonso, isn't it?
They don't get cars from Renault, do they?
But he couldn't overtake him in the stand-ins. Many would argue that Raikkonen had a lot of bad luck during this period. Well, although when they do tell you these stats, they heavily weight it on that 2002 season, which I'll admit was god-awful. But at the end of the day, Renault did just seem to have the better car, and Alonso drove extremely well that season. The biggest shock was honestly Ferrari. Michael Schumacher was definitely best of the rest if you exclude Renault and McLaren. He was about 7 F2004s away from actually being able to touch the World Championship trophy. And after the last 5 years of utter dominance, it was hard for a lot of people to believe that Ferrari had gone this far down. Truly, the Italians would have to eat so much spaghetti to overcome their pain this time. But could Michael Schumacher bounce back to please the Tifosi in 2006? Well, it's Michael Schumacher. Of course he could. In 2006, he really gave Fernando a run for his money. And Alonso had to be a lot smarter about how he was going to win his race. But hold on! I forgot to mention an incredibly sad death that happened this year. 2006 was the death of the V10 engine. The screaming, piercing, deafening your grandma when you watch the TV noise of the V10 engine was no longer in 2006. And instead, this year, engines were replaced with V8s. Well, apart from Toro Rosso, because basically they were Minardi in 2005, and Minardi were going bankrupt, so they went to FIA and were like, please let us run a V10 for 2006. We have no money. And the FIA were like, okay. But then Toro Rosso bought Minardi for 2006, and the agreement was kept, so Toro Rosso actually ran a V10 engine. So I suppose 2007 was the real death of the V10. Anyway, Alonso and Schumacher had some incredible battles, while it was actually McLaren who lagged behind a little bit this year. But when I think of this season, I always come back to one race between Michael and Fernando. And it was where Fernando was acting like the Great Wall of China and refusing to let Michael Schumacher past. In what was honestly a brilliant defense, and probably how Alonso learned to do it for Hungary 2021 against Hamilton. It was during a race at Imola in 2006, and still I can't believe Alonso came out on top. For fuck's sake, I can't say that. What is it with F1 words and always sounding so suspicious?
So Liuzzi gets a fair enough start, but he's already got Massa coming inside him.
Alonso edged out Michael Schumacher. You know what? Forget it. Alonso won the championship. And with that, Michael announced his retirement, hung up his racing boots, and left the sport. At least for the rest of the 2000s. He came back in 2010. You know what else happened in 2006? My man, Jensen, the first driver to hit the DRS button, won his first ever race.
Because here, in his 113th Grand Prix start, he's proved the critics wrong. They said he might never win a Grand Prix. He's done it! Jensen Button wins the Hungarian Grand Prix!
2007 was a relatively uneventful season. There was just a couple things like Spygate, Hamilton versus Alonso, and Raikkonen replacing Schumacher. Oh, fuck me, this wasn't an uneventful season, was it? As we head into the latter half of the 2000s, I'm gonna quickly ask for your subscription because, Jesus Christ, if you can put up with me yapping for this long, you might as well just subscribe and watch the rest of my videos because you are some kind of insane person. I'm also going to quickly thank all of these guys, the channel members who massively help support the channel, and you can do the same from just 99p a month. It really does help me out, so thank you so much to everyone who's done it. Let's start though with 2007's driver transfers because, as you can imagine, Michael Schumacher's retirement changed a lot. Kimi Raikkonen was to be the German's successor. Once his biggest rival over at McLaren, now the one to fill his shoes. What a lovely story. McLaren themselves would have a whole new lineup of reigning world champion Fernando Alonso and a rookie. And you know, a rookie and a world champion always makes sense because the rookie is not going to be putting pressure on the champion is going to be able to take the lead. And oh fuck me, it's Lewis Hamilton, isn't it? Oh god. Okay, so the insanely talented and with a lot of testing under his belt, Lewis Hamilton was going to be the one to partner Fernando Alonso. And he was well and truly up to speed by the start of the season, so Fernando was going to have to watch out. Now, I may have just told you that Lewis and Fernando were driving for McLaren, but some in the comments might be saying they actually drove for Ferrari. This is because of a teeny tiny, absolutely enormous scandal called Spygate, where a McLaren engineer was found to be stealing classified Ferrari documents, and therefore he was fired and McLaren were disqualified from the Constructors' Championship. Luckily, the car was found to have contained no Ferrari elements, believe that if you will, and Hamilton and Alonso were still able to take part in the Drivers' Championship and retain all of their points. Sorry, but has the season even started yet? Ferrari took 3 out of the first 5 race victories, and Fernando took 2. But then, going into Canada, Lewis took his maiden victory, and he won the next round in the USA. As Lewis improved, and Fernando, mate, you might want to cover your ears for this because you're going to get PTSD, the McLaren team appeared to support the Brit more and more in his challenge for the championship. And Fernando at least felt that that was unfair. Although Ron Dennis would probably tell you they were treated equally, something he valued at McLaren, for example in the times of Senna and Prost. It all kicked off when someone accused Alonso of handing out bribes to his engineers on his side of the garage, when in fact this has actually been debunked. He was just handing out shares of his podium winnings, something he'd always done throughout his entire career to help motivate his engineers.
No.
And then in Hungary, perhaps the biggest controversy occurred. It was Fernando's turn to have the final run in qualifying, something they alternated between each race, and Lewis Hamilton was given a team order stating exactly that. Yet it was a team order Lewis Hamilton chose to ignore. Therefore, in the pits, Alonso waited and held Lewis Hamilton up.
To Alonso out. Yep, they want him out of there. Now Alonso's not getting on with it. Only a minute and 40 to go. Is he blocking Hamilton here?
Which escalated the situation. Fernando then set off from the pits and managed to make his final qualifying run with a few seconds to spare, whereas Hamilton didn't. This gave Alonso pole position, but he was then handed a 5-place grid penalty, which was given to him for blocking someone in the pit lane. It was for the aforementioned incident, and something again he deemed was quite unfair considering he wasn't blocking anyone but his teammate and he was in his pit box. In the end, honestly, doing that at such a difficult track to pass at probably didn't help Fernando and helped Hamilton more, as Hamilton went on to win the race and Fernando lost out on valuable points to chase him down. Look, it's okay, man. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. It happens to the best of us. But after that, we were off to the home country of only Chinese F1 driver ever, Guangzhou, which was the penultimate round of the season, and Lewis Hamilton was called into the pit lane. It was just for a standard stop to change his tires, but as Lewis pulled into the pits, he shamelessly stole Lance Stroll's strategy from Brazil 2024, 17 years beforehand, and beached his car in the gravel.
Yeah, that's what I would have did. I said earlier, right?
Now, this was mostly because his tires were extremely worn and McLaren had left him out there for quite a long time. It was also probably just with that rookie inexperience, he wouldn't have known how to drive on that kind of tire necessarily yet. It was more a matter of circumstance that Hamilton ended up there. This did give Kimi Raikkonen the race win and gave him valuable points on catching up to Lewis in the championship. I mean, look, there was not a chance with how quick McLaren were, Kimi Raikkonen would ever really win the championship. I mean, going into the final round, he was still 7 points off Hamilton, and this is in a time where race wins only gave you 10 points. If he won it, I would eat my Fernando Alonso cutout behind me. Well, actually, that's a hypothetical, I would, because he actually did go and win it, the madman. Raikkonen won the race, as Lewis suffered from a small gearbox issue on lap 8 that pushed him back. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't out at that moment because he wasn't driving a French car, so it didn't know it could blow up.
Typical. Why did it done that?
But he would need to recover to 6th in order to win the championship. But this time, he only managed 7th. And with Fernando Alonso in 3rd, the two ended up behind Kimi Raikkonen in the championship. Or Lewis and Alonso were tied on points by the end of the season. And you know what? I think Fernando and Lewis being tied on points is honestly the best way to sum up how that season went. They were so busy tripping up over each other and were so close on track, they let Raikkonen slip through the cracks and take what was definitely a well-deserved championship. Anyway, with their relationship as sour as those toxic waste sweets you find in the money-laundering American candy stores, British fans, you will understand, McLaren booted out Fernando Alonso and sentenced him to Renault F1 car for the remainder of his McLaren contract. This was because they didn't want him in any cars that could be anywhere near as competitive as McLaren. That's not a joke or a jab at Renault, that is genuinely the reason as to why. And God, I can't really think of any punishment worse than driving a Renault. On to 2008, at least things would begin to calm down as the season was relatively uneventful. Oh, fuck, it wasn't. At this part of the script writing, I was starting to realize I'd bitten off a bit more than I could chew. But fuck it, I'm this far through, let's just get on with it. This season continued the McLaren and Ferrari rivalry we'd enjoyed watching through the entirety of the 2000s pretty much.
But there should be a skibbity thrashing for such insolence as this.
And for decades before in Formula 1. Hamilton and Heikki Kovalainen, a pretty unremarkable driver, thank God, and I actually mean it this time, would make the McLaren lineup, whereas reigning world champion Kimi Raikkonen and Felipe Massa were the ones who were representing Ferrari. Now, you would assume the title battle would go down again between Raikkonen and Lewis Hamilton, but you may be surprised to hear Felipe Massa, someone who'd been pretty much thwarted by Kimi the year before, was going to be the one putting up a fight this season. Now, many F1 fans just chalk this up to Kimi Raikkonen being hungover from his celebrations of world champion the year before and not really caring as much as to how he did in 2008.
It's more like a hobby for me, so obviously I don't need to do it if I don't.
But it was all really because of something called Santander Gate. I promise you there is just one more gate after this and then we're done. I really do promise. So around the Monaco Grand Prix of 2008, there began some rumours of big boy Fernando over here fancying the Ferrari seat. Who could really blame him? And McLaren's 2007 sponsor, Santander, were a little bit unhappy that the Spanish driver they wanted to represent had been dropped prematurely. You know, they were a Spanish bank, they wanted to back a Spanish driver like Alonso. By the way, I have already done a deep dive on this story, so if you want to know the real ins and outs of it, you can watch this video here, but this is just going to be a brief summary. Santander were also about to undergo a huge expansion into the Brazilian market. So what better way for them to promote that than to sponsor a Brazilian Formula 1 driver also? You know, someone such as Felipe Massa. So what better way to make everybody happy than to offer Ferrari a fuckload of money to have an Alonso Massa lineup in a deal that could be worth billions in exposure within the Brazilian market. So during the season, Ferrari began to slowly sabotage Raikkonen's season, only by a little bit, to hinder his performance. And then they would push him out of the team and bring Fernando Alonso in. So that's why Felipe Massa is our title challenger. Yeah, no one said it was going to be a short story, did they? Anyways, let's talk about some actual racing this season, and let's start with Spa. Lewis Hamilton had taken the checkered flag first, but was handed a controversial 25-second penalty for an illegal overtake.
Touch. Hamilton will have to give the corner back. They're side by side. He'll have to have a go at him at La Source. Play it cool, but it went wrong for him. Hamilton's through. They touch again. Amazing action here.
Thank God F1 Twitter didn't exist in these days, or it would have been a hell site for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And it already is a hell site. But going into Singapore, Felipe Massa really needed a good result until, of course, crashgate. This is my final gate, unless you want a video on fucking Watergate. At the Singapore Grand Prix, Renault were a little bit fed up with being mid and fancied actually winning something for a change. So during the race, the team unexpectedly pitted Fernando quite early on. And then, rather conveniently, their other driver slammed into the wall, which brought out the safety car, and with Alonso leading the pack after a bunch of pit stop chaos, he was in first. And after that, he then went on to win the race. Okay, so the race was fixed. That was obvious. And they did a pretty shitty job of hiding it when Piquet Jr. practiced his crash during the formation lap. Interestingly, the public didn't find out the race was fixed until the year later in 2009. It was more important that during the pit stop phase, Felipe Massa's fuel line had got caught when they were releasing the car, which meant he drove off with it still plugged in, and it cost him a bunch of time to get that removed. And from there, his race was essentially ruined. And that, kids, is why Felipe Massa wants that race discounted from 2008, which would give him the F1 Drivers' World Championship for that year. But that's a whole other story. Going into the Brazilian Grand Prix, it would again be the season finale, and therefore it would decide the fate of the World Championship. Much like last year, Ferrari were on top during the race, and Massa took the race win, and when he crossed the line, Lewis Hamilton was in 6th place. Now this year, Hamilton needed to finish in P5 in order to win the championship, and P6 he would lose it to Massa. Of course, with about 3 corners left and Hamilton in 6th, there was absolutely no possible way he was going to win the championship. The Ferrari garage, rather expectedly, started to celebrate. Then, on the last corner of the last lap, the driver in 5th, Timo Glock, who was on dry tyres, encountered torrential rain, was driving extremely slow, and Lewis Hamilton on wet tyres was able to pass him for 5th place, and therefore the championship.
Slowly.
It is, it's gone! Oh my goodness me!
And also spawning my absolute favourite clip ever of a Ferrari driver slamming his head into the wall when he learns the information that Massa didn't win. Goddamn, 2008 was eventful. Let's see what we've got left. Hopefully something quite easy. Oh shit. 2009 was another set of huge regulation changes. And we're definitely a lot closer now to being able to decipher the real impact the 2000s had on Formula 1 and how it changed the sport going into the 2010s. And 2009 really is crucial in that. There's also the fact that between 2008 and 2009, the real, actual important world suffered a huge financial crash. Which, if you don't know, meant that companies weren't quite so willing to throw millions and millions of pounds at Roman Grosjean to crash their cars into walls. It led to quite a few sponsors and teams pulling out of the sport. Such as one example we'll be looking at, which was Honda. But Honda pulling out of the sport started a story that ended pretty insanely. In 2008, Honda's team boss, Ross Brawn, who was also responsible for Michael Schumacher winning all that shit we talked about earlier in the video, yeah, pretty clever guy, he told Honda in 2008 to instead focus their resources on the 2009 season, as the new regulations gave them much more of a chance at running near the front. Honda had listened to Brawn's advice, and when they pulled out of the 2009 season, they'd already pretty much built the car ready to run for that year. It just needed an engine. So Ross was like, "Oi, Honda mate, since you've pulled out like a sell us the company for £1 and I'll run it instead." And Honda just said, okay. And I'm not joking when I said £1, which for all of you Americans who watch my videos means £1 Great British pound. Honda really sold the team to Brawn for just that, making the team the now all-new constructor Brawn GP. Now Ross again tried to bargain with Honda, asking them pretty please can they supply the engines, as again it was something they'd already nearly finished. But this time Honda said no. Fuck you, said Ross Brawn, who was actually the fuck you guy, and instead managed to get an engine deal with Mercedes, even though the car's chassis wasn't built to accommodate that engine. All of the teams did also pip in a little bit to help try and keep Brawn alive during the off-season, in a bit of a coming together we'd never really before seen in Formula 1. That's probably because they didn't expect Brawn to do what they did next. With a driver lineup of Jenson Button and Rubens Barrichello, Brawn absolutely dominated the start of the season. Over were the days of Ferrari and McLaren. They were the new top dogs. 6 of the first 7 race victories went to Jenson Button, and just 1 went to the man who proved to be his closest rival, a young man named Sebastian Vettel, who was driving for an energy drink. Yep, this was also the year that Red Bull really started to come into their own. Goodbye McLaren and Ferrari, hello Brawn and heart palpitations in a can. However, with the limited budget, the Brawn car really started to fall to pieces. And when I say fall to pieces, I mean mean in the literal sense. During a race in Hungary, a part of the Brawn car of Rubens Barrichello, a spring, flew out from the back and struck Felipe Massa in the head. It literally pierced through his helmet, and had it been a millimeter in the wrong direction, he would have died instantly. Thankfully, Felipe Massa did survive the ordeal, but had to sit out the remainder of the season. In the metaphorical sense, Brawn's car also did continue to fall apart, because they just didn't have the budget to bring the upgrades teams like Red Bull could. And after Jenson Button's winning streak, the team could only manage 2 more wins with Rubens Barrichello. Jenson, my friend I'm going to pee in Fernando's seat, Button, was clearly also starting to feel the pressure of potentially being a world champion.
Lando, we can be world champion, I said. Please, Lando. Lando!
As some poor results actually began to allow Vettel to close the gap towards him. However, in the penultimate round of the season, which was again Brazil, Button drove an absolutely phenomenal race to go from 15th
16
to 5th, and that allowed him to well and truly wrap up the Drivers' World Championship. And Brawn became the first ever team to win the Constructors and Drivers' World Championship in their first year of asking. The only other time that's been possible was when I set the AI to 0 on my F1 2023 My Team career mode, even though Pastor Maldonado wasn't much fucking help as a teammate. But 2009, in an almost poetic way, set up for what the 2010s would be like. Red Bull was the top dog for the early 2010s.
Du bist Weltmeister!
And Mercedes, which is the team Brawn was sold to for 2010 and were largely the same staff, would dominate the latter half of the decade. So the 2000s actually came to be this sort of final glorious piece of time where we got to see McLaren and Ferrari really duel before ushering in a more modern era of F1 that we're used to now. Also, Renault sometimes managed to remember how to build a car during that time, with the occasional Williams appearance too, who had been dominating during the 90s. Don't get me wrong, the 2000s had some downsides too. Poor safety, especially at the start of the season with the tyres, and even at the end with the incident that happened to Massa. Some huge controversies like all of the gates, and barely any overtakes on some of the tracks. But there is a reason why it's considered one of F1's golden ages, and now maybe you understand that a bit more too. If you've made it this far into the video, I've got to say a massive thank you. And just quickly remind you to subscribe if you would like to as well. This one was pretty long, so huge thanks to the channel members who help support this and also keep me motivated by chatting to me during the Discord, and I share some updates with them. Thank you guys. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and goodbye!